All right, we are rolling.
This is Joe Galloway conducting an oral history interview with Donald Akridge on February 24th, 2020 at 1:30 p.m. We are located at the Atlanta History Center, Atlanta, Georgia. Sir, before we begin, could you please state and spell your first and last name for the transcriber?
Yes, first name is Don, D-O-N, middle initial B, last name Akridge, A-K-R-I-D-G-E.
Thank you. Before we talk about your time in wartime, I'd like to get a little biographic information about you. When and where were you born?
Pelham, Georgia. That's Mitchell County, southwest Georgia, farm country.
Yeah. And when?
1945, November 2nd.
Daddy got home from the war.
All the males in the family were in the war.
Mine too. My dad and 6 of his brothers and 4 of my mother's brothers. We were heavily invested.
Very.
And I'm sure your family was too.
Yeah, well then it was just the thing to do.
Yeah? Who were your family members at that time?
Well, it was a large family. The Willis family was my mother's maiden name, Akridge, my father's name. They were, almost all of them were in farming back at that time.
And the right number of kids is 10 or 12?
Pretty close.
How many siblings?
Pretty
did
close.
You have?
I have 5.
5.
5.
And where did you grow up? What do you consider your hometown where you went to elementary and high school?
Pelham, small
Pelham.
town of Pelham, Georgia. And I actually finished high school in Camilla, which was like 9 miles away from Pelham.
How did you come to enter the military?
Back then, the draft was still in effect, and I did not have any kind of a college deferment, so I was prime age. As soon as I got out of high school, I was 1A. So it was just a matter of time until I got my draft notice.
So what did you do? You enlisted.
I did, but I knew the war was getting hotter at that time.
Which is what year?
65.
65. It was just getting started good.
Yeah, I actually graduated high school in 64. But I was 1A because I didn't have a deferment, and I knew that my time was coming.
Your friends and neighbors were going to write you.
It came. It arrived in 65, and I had been talking with different units about joining as opposed to getting drafted. So I was lucky in the sense that was underway at the time that my draft notice arrived, and I had been talking with the Marine Corps. Not many people wanted to join the Marine Corps back then.
For a reason.
Well, I didn't know at the time what the reason was, but I thought they had a particular MOS that they wanted me to train for, which was in the motor transport division, convoys, basically anything that had wheels on it, except for aircraft. So they turned me into a train mechanic.
How long did that take?
I think the class itself was 10 weeks, as best I recall,
Yeah.
and that was at Montford Point, at
Yeah.
a large training facility there, Montford Point at Camp Lejeune, North
Yeah.
Carolina.
Yeah.
So they turned me into a mechanic.
All right, you've told us about signing up with the Marines or volunteering to be drafted by them. And where did you do your basic?
Parris Island.
Parris Island. And you had the mechanics training. Where were you assigned once you finished that mechanic training?
Well, I was assigned to a reserve unit, active reserve unit in Atlanta. But I spent time at Camp Lejeune, Camp Pendleton twice, Little Creek, Virginia.
They're moving you around.
Military, they do that. They don't want any grass growing under your feet.
No.
Yeah, but combination of Parris Island, Little Creek, Virginia, Camp Pendleton, Camp Lejeune.
All doing mechanic work.
Not all of it.
Oh.
Marines are, first and foremost, Marines are infantry.
Infantry.
Even if you don't have an infantry MOS, we're all infantry. So the only time that I was working as a mechanic was when I was in the active reserve. That's what they actually trained me for. The reserve unit had 2 openings, 2, and somehow I tested high enough. My mechanical aptitude was such that they offered one of the 2 slots to me.
And this was doing what?
Being a mechanic, trained mechanic.
Yeah.
At a motor transport unit.
But did they assign you to a different duty?
No.
No.
But but aside from all Marines being basic infantry and riflemen, every Marine had an MOS. Some were infantry. The infantry guys are the ones who ended up in the jungles in Vietnam. I lucked out that I was not in country Vietnam.
Right. What responsibilities consume most of your time? What kind of vehicles were you working on?
Anything that had wheels, other than an aircraft.
Yeah.
But the large trucks in the military, they're called different things, but a 6x.
6x deuce and a half.
Thank you. That you must be a Marine too.
Mm.
Yep, deuce and a half. But that was the biggest thing. But there were also Jeeps and Ontos.
Yeah.
You name it. If it had wheels on it and it could run,
You were working on them.
worked on it. Our job was to keep them going.
What were living conditions like at any of these bases, or all of them?
Well, kind of tough, especially Camp Pendleton, because we spent time out in the hills, just bivouacked out. And those were the coldest summers, keeping in mind that I come from Georgia, where summers can get kind of tough. But out there, the summers, especially at night, up in the hills, get cold.
And you guys are in tents?
We wore tents and sleeping bags.
Who sends their mechanics out to the woods with the grunts?
Well, somebody's got to be out there to keep the stuff running.
You
something.
carry spare parts and mechanics tools out to the foxhole?
I always had tools, but very few spare parts. If you needed, there was always something that was broken down. So if you needed a part, you took it off. You cannibalized something else. Something else that wasn't operating.
The Marine supply system.
Yeah, you got wherever you could get it to get it running. That's
As
what
cheaply
you did.
as possible.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's pretty amazing how the military works, and the bottom line is just get it done. The how you get it done isn't nearly as important as the fact that you get it done.
Describe your friendships with and your impressions of your fellow Marines, the people you lived and worked with.
We were remarkably similar in a lot of respects. We, of course, once you go through Parris Island and that kind of training, it instills something into you that stays with you for your entire life. It really is a brotherhood and sisterhood now, less so back then. But I don't know if someone who hasn't been through such a thing, I don't know if they can really understand the depth, the intensity of those feelings.
Did you form friendships with men from different racial and social backgrounds?
We're all, yes, we were all one. There was no difference. We're all Marines.
Now we're talking 1965 or 6.
I arrived at Parris Island December 6th of 65.
65.
So it was predominantly for me, 65, 66.
Well, things were fairly quiet in America. The anti-war protests hadn't started. The race riots hadn't started. Any social or racial tensions come to your unit at that time?
Yes, there actually was some of that at Camp Lejeune. You know, once you get out of Parris Island, things are a bit different, but they're during the late 60s, just in general, there's quite a bit of racial
Oh yeah,
conflict.
It got a lot worse from 66 to 69.
Yeah, there was a lot of the black power kind of thing, and
We saw that in Vietnam, but only in the rear areas.
yeah. Well, an interesting thing for me, the way that I grew up, we worked in the fields right beside a lot of black people.
Mm-hmm.
There was never conflict. None of us had any money. We're all poor. So
I picked cotton one time in
I did too.
Texas.
I have actually plowed a mule. You won't find many people today who have actually plowed.
I watched
a
my
mule.
grandpa behind 2 mules plowing the lower pasture, and I saw him disappear up to his knee in a hole, and then a black cloud came out, bumblebees, and I learned some new cuss words that day.
Oh, it's tough. Farming back then wasn't very mechanized.
No.
But it was a lot of.
There's your mechanics right there, your hands.
Yeah, and I never knew that there wasn't such a thing as just hard manual labor.
Yeah.
We we're drifting a little bit from military, but it's part of the foundation of who I am, which bled over into the military. But back then, a full day labor on the farm paid $3 to $4 a day.
Yeah.
A day. I think back to that now.
Buy a
it's
big
like,
sack of turnips for that.
tough, but all of it really helped prepare me for what was to come in the Marine Corps and also during Vietnam, just in general.
How much time did you have to yourself? What did you do for recreation or off-duty time?
In the military,
Yeah,
you don't have
you
a whole
don't
lot of
have
time
much of that.
to yourself. But what we would do, we'd hang around on base and maybe go have a beer or leave town. Like at Camp Lejeune in particular, we'd go into Jacksonville, not Florida, Jacksonville, North Carolina. And most of the bars there, they were military oriented. Not all of them were friendly, and that if you weren't really careful, that they'd take all your money away
Oh,
from
I'm
you.
shocked.
But the more compelling story is when I was at Pendleton, I made the requisite visit to Tijuana. Did you ever go to Tijuana?
I have, yeah.
For a kid coming out of rural Georgia, going to Tijuana, talk
That's
about
shock.
a major shock that humans there could be such lack of humanity in humans. Just
Oh,
stuff I had never seen, never heard of. And I thought, my God. But that's kind of part of the military experience. You're out different places doing and seeing different things, and it kind of makes you grow up pretty fast.
can you describe for us the quality of the leadership in the units you served in?
Well, always good, tough, just tough, but usually fair. Of course, when you start off with Parris Island, it's kind of downhill from there. If you can survive Parris Island, keep in mind that these were 18, 19, 20-year-old kids. None of us had ever seen anything like that.
Yeah, I
We
bet.
were scared to death, just sure that we weren't going to make it through the day. I don't say that with a lot of jest. I mean, it was true. Parris Island back then was still very hands-on training. And when I say hands-on, I don't mean gently, hands-on.
Big time.
We got pounded on. If you goofed up, and sometimes even if you didn't, just to have something to do, they pound on you. That toughened us up. I mean, we're kids there, and a lot of us were headed off to the jungles. So you couldn't send a fragile kid out into that stuff, and not all kids who arrived at Parris Island made it through. There were some that got dumped out.
Hmm.
I was kind of surprised that I made it through, but I kept my mouth shut and ran hard. And
But the leadership you, as high as you could see, was good.
yes,
Yeah.
especially in retrospect, knowing the job that they had to do and the seriousness of it, and the fact that probably half or more of those kids were going to end up in Vietnam. That's very serious, tough stuff.
You volunteered for the Marines. Did you get what you were looking for?
And more.
And more.
Yeah, I did. I did. I was just a scared kid from the deep South, and I grew up. I grew up quickly, very quickly, and it has stayed with me my entire life.
Marines have a way of doing that.
They do. If you survive Parris Island, at least what it was back then, if you survive it, you can take most anything.
Could you describe any cutting-edge technology, science, medical advancements during your time in the Marine Corps?
No.
No.
There
We're
weren't any.
lucky to have adjustable wrenches.
Well, there wasn't much technology then. It was pretty basic stuff.
Yeah.
You had to keep your rifle clean and your sidearm clean, and you had to know how to use it, and had to keep like with us, the motor pool. It had to be reliable. Everything had to work, and if it didn't, people died. That's a big responsibility.
Big responsibility. Talk to us about your most vivid memories of your 2 years in the Marine Corps.
Well, it was a total of 6, including
6?
the active reserve.
Oh, you had that reserve bit added on.
Total of 6.
Describe for us the best day you had during your time in the Marines.
The day I got out.
Uh,
I say that a bit facetiously, but not totally so. The social upheaval in the U.S. during that time, and it was late 65 to late 71. We had all kinds of things. We had Kent State. We had the Kent State situation. We had protests going on all the time. We military weren't treated well. Even when we weren't in uniform, you could tell we were military because we had no hair, and we had the presence of we had a military presence, but the hair during hippie time, having no hair was always a dead giveaway.
Dead giveaway.
That you were military. But then you had Woodstock, the Woodstock Festival. You had the hippie generation. There was so much social upheaval in the U.S. to be in the military at that time, and to have to deal with all of that. Really tough. There's an example I'd like to use with that. One of the times we were out on a convoy. And we'd been out in the field. We're tired, dirty, and just ready to get back and get a hot shower and what have you. So, but in a convoy, we were traveling on an interstate to get from one place to another. And there, I was in the last truck in the convoy, and all the 6x were full of Marines. There was a car came up behind us, keeping in mind that I was in the 6x in the back of it, and there were several people in the car, and there was a woman passenger in the front, and they came up right close behind us and looked up and gave us the finger. So my quick inclination was to moon her, which I could not.
You were driving?
Pardon me?
You were driving?
No, I was in the back of the 6x.
You were in the back of the 6x? I
was in the back of it, looking down into the car that had come up behind us.
I'd have thought the truck full of Marines unzipping and peeing on them would do it.
That occurred to me, but I sat there and just stared. I could see her face. I mean, they were that close. I just stared. Didn't smile, didn't call her a name, didn't moon her, didn't throw anything at her. I just stared. But for veterans, for people in the military, to be exposed to that kind of thing at home, and that was not an isolated incident. That was tough, very tough.
Describe for us the worst day you had during your enlistment.
Do you mean other than the day that I arrived at Parris Island?
Oh, yeah.
Well, I would have to say that's probably the worst. I was certain I'd died and gone to hell. Other than the arrival day, I think that event that I just described, where the car came up behind us and the woman gave us a finger, that was pretty close, because I'm thinking, we don't need the stuff. This is bad stuff. Kind of drove home all of the crap that was going on.
Now, at some point you get assigned to Korea?
No.
No.
I was never out of the country.
You were inside the country for your entire enlistment?
Yes. Yeah. That's why I'm in the Vietnam era.
Yeah. How much contact did you have with your family back home?
Not much, but you have to keep in mind that there were no cell phones, there were no internet, there were no computers, so your only contact with home, and long distance telephone calls were just absurdly costly back then, especially when you're being paid almost nothing. So your only contact really was letter writing, and that's snail mail. So what wasn't much.
What'd you do when you got out of the Marines?
Well, there are two aspects to that. One was, what did I do as a Marine once I got out? The situation at home, meaning within the U.S., was just so awful at that time that I, as well as most of us, we never talked about it. I think that we're possibly the only veterans group that never talked about it at all. I mean, veterans in general tend to not talk a lot about those experiences, but we weren't.
Did you have trouble readjusting to civilian life?
Yeah. We weren't respected. We weren't welcomed home. So most of us, and it certainly was the case with me when I got out, all my military stuff, which I didn't have much left, but my clothes, boots, everything.
Chunked it.
Threw it away.
Mm.
And there were a lot of years passed, not just for me, but it was certainly my experience too. A lot of years passed that Vietnam, we just didn't talk about it at all. I mean, none. That was tough.
How much contact have you had with fellow veterans who served with you in one place or another since you got out?
With veterans that I actually served directly with and knew, answer is none.
None.
But veterans in general, as society started
There's tissues if you need.
as time started healing America, started coming out, so to speak, and talking about things. We had a lot of good leadership from a lot of people, higher up, fortunately, a lot of politicians are veterans. So there was a lot leadership from veterans organizations and politicians, and so that's what brought me, and I think most of us, out of the shell. Presently, I'm very actively involved in the Georgia National Cemetery, Georgia's newest veterans cemetery, with a large group of volunteers, and the majority of us are veterans.
Did your Marine experience change you and affect your life for good or ill afterward?
Good.
Good.
Yeah. Absolutely good. Gave me confidence that I could do things I never had a clue even existed, let alone my doing them. But yeah, if you, not everybody makes it through the Marine Corps. Not everybody makes it through just the military in general, and it's not for everybody. But I have confidence now, just in general, that I likely would never have had if I had not had that experience. I'm also deeply patriotic, intensely so.
Did your experience affect the way you think about our troops coming back from today's wars?
Yes. Bit of envy, and I don't mean envy in like any kind of a bad way. No resentment about it at all. I embrace all of the attention that that all veterans are getting, and I'm an active participant in helping veterans in any way that I can. So just because we weren't treated particularly well, maybe that whole experience is why I feel so intensely about it, in a good way, intensely about veterans as I do now.
Yeah.
And I don't mean just for me, just you've been there. I know
How
what
do
it's
you
like.
think the Vietnam War is remembered in our society today?
Better now than it was. It's remembered, I think, properly so as an unfortunate political war, a huge mistake. 53,000 KIA, 600,000 wounded. I think that cannot be justified.
Have you visited the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in D.C.?
Yeah, 2 or 3 times, yes.
What are your thoughts when you go there?
Intense sadness. I wonder, as most of us do, why my name is not up there. It wasn't to be, for the treasures in life that were lost. Incomprehensible.
Have you heard of the Vietnam War 50th anniversary?
Yes,
You're part of it
I
today.
am. I am.
What do you think of that?
I think it's a really good thing. I do. I think in anything that goes on now that recognizes veterans in general is a really good thing. That Vietnam veterans are now embraced and appreciated. 'Cause
Have you
we're
received-
passing at a pretty good clip.
Pretty good
now.
clip. Have you received your Vietnam veteran lapel pin?
I have.
You have.
I have.
All right, we're not having any luck giving them away today. You
Well,
guys
I'll
are
take another one if you got an extra.
You bet.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you for coming in.
Was that it?
You want to talk about that we didn't ask?
Not
Final thoughts?
a final thought. I think this project is like a really good project.
Why?
It's documenting history, a history that needs to be told. As we're passing our story is a bit different from other veterans, other wars and veterans events, and the way that Vietnam veterans were treated so poorly. That lesson just can't die. Can't. That's my last thought.
Thank you for coming in.
Thank you.